Hello and welcome to So You Want to Be a Writer. This is show 21.
Happy birthday.
Oh, and a happy birthday to you. In
Thank
fact, if it's not your birthday, a very merry unbirthday. So, I'm Ros Morris, I'm a writer, and with me is Peter Snell, who is the proprietor of Barton's Bookshop in Leatherhead, and we're sitting in Barton's Bookshop among the books. If you hear anything like a bus going past or people outside, that's because this is a live environment. Now, for the past 20 episodes, as this is our 21st, I've been really berating, no, not berating, but I have been bombarding Peter with the kinds of things that writers think about as we make our books. And he remarked to me in a recent show that it had actually changed the way he read. And I was so interested in this, I thought it would be a really good idea to explore that in detail. So what I've been doing is I've asked him to keep almost a reading diary, just a very casual reading diary, just some notes of the kinds of things he's been noticing as he's been reading that he wouldn't necessarily have been alert to before. And one reason I thought this would be interesting is because one of the ways that we learn to write is by observation. It's by noticing what works, it's by noticing what books are doing to us. And it's a process that once you start, it's fascinating, or it is to people like me anyway. So this is what we're going to discuss today. And Peter's got a stack of books. Peter, why don't you start by telling us what you've been reading, because we'll probably hop in and out of various books as we discuss various points. So what are the books you've got there?
Okay, the books that I'm just finished or I'm currently reading this last week, I've got a new Amitav Ghosh, that's called Flood of Fire. That'll be out in May, so you'll be able to enjoy it then. That's a stonker. It's 600 odd pages.
We should say May 2015, because this will stay on the internet forever, and who knows when people might find it, including aliens. Okay, go on.
Scary. Then David Mitchell's The Bone Clocks. Another fairly hefty tome. And a young adult book, Matt Haig's Echo Boy. We've also got a few other books in the background, but those are the ones that I'm really looking at the moment.
That's quite a mix of styles. Do you want to tell us just briefly a little bit about where each of them would fit in a bookshop?
Echo Boy would simply be with children's fiction.
Okay, what age group?
What age group? I don't have age groups in my non-adult part of the shop. They all go together.
Well, looking at the cover, I would say that that's sort of towards adult, young adult. Would you say that's young adult?
I would think...
Sort of before young adult and young adult?
It depends on the reader. I would think anywhere from 11 to 111 would be a fair readership for that.
I always try and say that about my books, for anybody of any age. Okay, yeah. So that's that audience.
That's that
Bone Clocks is obviously going to be different.
Bone Clocks is, again, fiction, adult fiction, but it's David Mitchell, so we can cover that a bit later. And then Amitav Ghosh, again, adult fiction, just modern fiction.
Mm-hmm. So what are the things that you notice about the styles that make them suitable for their audience?
One major difference between the three books is that the one that's the young adult book has as its main protagonists, as its cast, mainly young people, or the central hero character is a young woman, and so the whole book revolves around her and her activities and the interactions between her and the rest of the world. So it's a teen-focused look at this particular story.
Yeah. I remember writing about teenage books for my characters book, and I was analysing there the very different emotional stages that characters are at, depending on which sort of age group it's for. It's with teen fiction, it seems to be a very distinct thing. There's a very distinct phase, which is the sort of coming into the adult world, experiencing everything for the first time. Before that, there seems to be quite a different tone to the emotional register. Yes,
there's all that. Also, within something like this book, Echo Boy, you've got the power plays between adults and younger people, and the struggles for younger people to have their voice heard, have their opinions validated,
and become themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just part of not this book, but the whole thread of young adult.
It is. It's the very essence of young adult, absolutely. Isn't it? Yes. Although you would have known that long before I ever started going on at you about books. So.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
No, it's an interesting discussion. But I suppose, and I'm not familiar with the Ghost. Ghost, is that pronounced correctly?
I think so. That'll do fine.
Okay, yeah. But I'm a bit more familiar with David Mitchell, and he's got a very distinctive style. And what I think of when I think of David Mitchell is structure, because he does quite a lot of things with contrasting structures. Is there anything that particularly strikes you about it?
I wouldn't have used the word structure. I'd have used the word complexity. But it comes to much the same thing, I think, where David Mitchell is concerned. Yes, the bone clocks. I don't want to give any plot spoilers out about any of these books, so that's going to be a bit difficult. But the whole book is structured around a number of people who meet and interact and re-meet in different groupings at various time differences, so that you might have a particular subset, and then 5 years later some of them plus a few others.
So sorry about that. Phones do ring from time to time, and as we said, that we are recording in the shop. So we were talking about how David Mitchell has actually assembled this novel from is it the viewpoints of different characters, revisiting
it's the viewpoints of different characters, and the characters mix in different groupings. I'd say at periods of time elapse between meetings, but slowly we learn that there are hidden depths to the characters. There's something else. There's another story going on in the background, which just adds another layer, another depth to the whole thing.
Now, are you noticing? Now, this is with me with my writerly head on, because I haven't read that yet, but what I would be thinking as I would read it would be, this has been put next to this, now this bit has been put next to this, now we're hearing from this character. Are you a bit more aware of that going on in the writer's mind?
Yes, not so much with David Mitchell, simply because there's so much complexity in there already that I'm already having to think like that with reading his work, and sort of analyse it a little more forensically as I go along anyway. But yes, I'm looking at it much more that way, and appreciating the breaks and the repositionings and things like that. Yeah,
because something interesting that you can do with a structure like that is you can keep the story momentum going by cutting away, by interspersing something that adds a contrast, and you can keep the tension going. And
absolutely,
this is something that writers do when they have structures like that, and they choose very carefully where they are going to bring in a new episode or break, or what contrast they're going to show. So
yes, I would imagine it was very carefully plotted.
It would have been
to produce those sort of effects. Yeah.
Yes. In thinking about that kind, or in having that kind of thing brought to your attention, has it increased your pleasure in this kind of book?
I don't know whether it's increased my pleasure.
Oh dear.
It's increased my involvement with the book, I don't think it's decreased the pleasure, but I think it's just changed it and put it out into other arenas. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yes, it does make sense. Something people often ask me is, doesn't it spoil a book for you by observing these things the writer's doing and knowing what the writer might be doing? But it doesn't spoil it for me at all. I'm very curious about it, but I'm also still responding to it in the way that the writer intended. So it's as if I'm actually reading as two people.
Yes, I can see that, and I have some of those feelings. My fears are that obviously when I read a book I've never read before, then I can take things out of it. But if I go back to one of my favourites that I reread every now and then, will I find it different? Will I look at it differently? Will it not be the same book? Will it have changed for me? That I haven't dared try yet, but I'll let you know if and when that happens.
Well, it might well have changed because you'd be older.
Thank you.
Well, so would I.
Yeah.
But this is, sometimes we find that books we loved in our early 20s we actually can't abide in our 40s, and but there are books that hit us at exactly the right time.
I'm not thinking of that sort of thing. I'm thinking of something like Lord of the Rings that I would reread every 5 or 10 years. It'd be interesting to see if that changes for me at all.
Okay, well, I'm sure you'll let us know. Something else I wanted to ask about was the writing style. Since we're talking about things like structure, the writing style, which is very much, it can be caught up in the structure. Now, the author's style should work in the service of the material, really. Have you any thoughts on that based on the kinds of things I've been making you aware of?
Well, yes. Let's look at the new one, the Amateur Gosh, the Flood of Fire. Now, it's the last book in a series, A Sea of Poppies, but the dropping of information into this volume by the author means you don't have to have read the previous one. He's thought carefully about just putting in what you need to know at any one stage, so that the whole book is comprised of an awful lot of very, very short sections which come together, progressing the story, changing character, changing viewpoint. But there's a constant drip into the reader's mind of information and language and social aspects, because this is set in India and the China Seas at the time of the Opium Wars. So there's a whole different culture to learn and integrate, and lots of language to put in here that's very, very different.
When you say language, do you mean terminology?
Terminology, yes. Hindu words, Bengali words, all that sort of thing. And most of it's been done so beautifully that you don't need any translation.
That's a really good observation, because this is something that's very difficult for writers, actually. The exposition and the backstory.
Absolutely.
How do you get it in without it looking just like a dump?
And when you visit somewhere, he will describe it, because that's your journey in the bullock cart from the harbour to the hotel or whatever. But that gives you the information you need to know about what Singapore was like in 1840, that sort of thing.
And it all feels natural and
relevant. It all feels
relevant.
natural. It's not plot exposition. It's not, here's a chunk of backstory. It's not, here's a chunk of description to show you where you are. It's just beautifully woven in. It's
interesting that you mentioned description, because I was on the point of saying that, because something else that I hear quite a lot from people is they say, I don't like books with a lot of description. And I think what they're reacting to is description that seems to have been just dumped in, rather than description that seems to be part of the experience that you're going through. But what you've identified here is somebody who is very good at doing all this.
Beautifully crafted. As I say, what you need is drip-fed into you a little bit before you need it, and then it's there, and you realise it. You've already accumulated this knowledge, you've assimilated it, and then you can just apply it to what you're reading next. But the thing on language and the foreign words, is extraordinary. I don't know whether the final production copy of the book will have a glossary. It might well do, they often do. Every now and then I thought, oh, I'd like to make this like an academic book and have little footnotes or have brackets after the foreign word just saying what it is in English. Every now and then, not every one. But that is very difficult.
I find that footnotes get in the way.
Yeah.
But a glossary is there if you need it.
Yeah, but then you have to turn the pages and...
But you can choose not to.
Yes.
Whereas a footnote's got this irritating little number.
Yes.
And it trips you over.
Yeah.
And you might just want to think, I'll do that, the explanation. Yeah. I'll rely on the fact that I will eventually understand. Because some authors do that.
And I was happy to go with that. There's all the nomenclature of the British Army, the Indian Army in the days of the Raj, all that sort of thing, and yeah, you just absorb it. It's been beautifully done.
So, are you noticing more when something doesn't work? Maybe
Yes.
not in those particular books, but
I can't give you an example from these books because I think they're quite good. But yes, every now and then I get pulled up short because. I'll tell you where. It's in the current TV Wolf Hall. I find that every now and then there's a sudden jump in the plot and you're left a little bit at sea for a bit until you realise where you are and what's happening. You're not always led in to the next development.
It's interesting that you talk about leading in because a very good writer knows exactly where they're leading you.
I really have been learning, haven't I?
Yes,
yeah.
you have.
Yeah.
Yes, you have. And I was really interested to ask about this because I remember noticing that I was reading differently, just gradually. And as I said, I found it very rewarding. So when you said you were too, I thought, right, we really have to pin this down. So, do we think it's time for some music? Are our brains needing a bit of a rest?
I need a rest, certainly.
Okay, so what I've chosen is... You do something to me, the Cole Porter version, and this one is sung by Sinead O'Connor.
Okay, so why did you choose that song?
Why did I choose that, apart from the fact that it's another song I deeply love? He's talking about this mysterious power that in this case a person can have over you, but also a writer has a mysterious power over the reader, and this is something that we've been trying to get to the bottom of all the time we've been discussing what writers do to readers. So that's why I chose that song, and I particularly like this line about do that voodoo that you do so well.
Yes, I wasn't thinking of that bit, but to me that song is about, and writing and reading is about, changing mood.
Oh, yes.
Changing mood and changing perception. Some books that I read, and one of the ones that I'm reading here, are changing my perceptions of a particular period of history. Even though it's fiction, it's making me re-examine my present knowledge and my feelings about something. But it's also changing my mood when I read a book. That you can feel your heart speeding up, your breath changing, the way you think changing in line with a book when it's been well crafted, in the same way that the soundtrack to a movie can have a beat that speeds up and increases your heart rate with it to increase the tension. I think some books do the same thing, that as things develop in the story, in the plot line, and get faster and faster and faster, you get sucked in more and more, and I think your heart rate does go up.
Oh, it certainly does. Yes, yes. The technical question here is: are you noticing more of how that's being done in the books you're reading?
Yes, not fully. I'm conscious that I'm saying, "Oh, how this has been done to me, but exactly how has it been done?
Yeah, the voodoo.
I'm still not sure about how the voodoo comes about. Yes.
Well, often we spend the rest of our lives trying to work out how the voodoo comes about, but if we just notice a tiny new thing each time, then that can be very exciting.
Yes, little bits. You think, oh, that was clever, that was subtle, that was nice. I appreciate you've done that you told me that. All that sort of thing.
Have you got an example? We don't want to give spoilers, obviously, but is there something that you could say you'd noticed?
Gosh, in one of the books, is this appropriate? In the Echo Boy, the young adult novel, there is a character who's introduced fairly early on in a very sinister light and in a threatening light. But later on it turns out that our interpretation of his actions and the interpretation of the main character in the book of his actions were perhaps not as accurate as they could have been. So that there's a change of perception.
Does that make you like the character more?
Like the character more.
Warm to them more? Feel more empathy for them, perhaps?
Oh dear. In this case, yes, I think it probably did.
Because that's probably why it was done.
I mean, the character in question is in fact a highly advanced robot, which you know all about, don't you?
I think I'm going to have to read this. But no, it's interesting because that is a technique that no, I don't want to spoil this for you. It's probably been very cleverly done, but that is a technique that is quite a powerful one in the writer's arsenal. They make you dislike or suspect or be suspicious of somebody to start with, and then they do some clever switch, and when they at that point make you see them in a new light, you warm to them more.
Yes.
And is that what you found?
Yes, this character starts off as a sinister character, then becomes a better character, a more acceptable character, then suffers and becomes
even better,
something of a hero character.
Oh, don't tell me any more.
No, I don't need to tell any more.
You don't need to tell me
no
any
plot
more.
spoilers.
But
I haven't even said it's a male or female character, so you don't know.
But this is one of the very careful, clever things that Matt Haig has done with this book. And he'll have planned that very carefully and done it very deliberately. And it's one of the voodoo things, because you just find it working on you. You think, how did they do that? And as writers, these are some of the moments we live for, to discover that, you can do that. This is so exciting.
Yes, but he's a joy to read. Yeah.
And moving on from that, again on the subject of voodoo, there's something else that good writers do, which is they can do two things at once with something. So you might think that you are just seeing an interesting episode in somebody's life, but it's actually telling you a lot more. Is there any of that you've become more aware of? It might be characterization at the same time as an interesting dilemma, but often writers are giving you more than one piece of information.
Yes,
at once.
there's a character in Amitabh Ghosh's book, a recently widowed Indian lady who, in the 1840s, who breaks through the traditions of purdah and seclusion and becomes a much more forceful character. So there's a change in her life, and we're seeing that happening. But that's, yes.
And when we're shown that, are we shown the information about her social situation at the same time as something she's doing?
Absolutely, yes. And so you can do the contrast between the two, and then other people's reaction to her proposed course of action. Yeah. Yeah.
And very often you find a writer has seeded something and then brings it out later, and you think, oh, I was told about that. It was, say, hidden in plain sight.
Yes. Yeah.
And
no helium balloons in any of these books, but we'll get there.
he's referring to
show number 7, was it? I don't know.
Oh gosh, you've got a good memory. You can remember which show it was, but it's a story that really stayed with me. So I often use it as an example. I mean, better kind of explain quickly, but it's a technique called Reincorporation, which is where you hide something in plain sight and then bring it back into the story. And the reason Peter's mentioned helium balloons was that I told a story about a supper party that went on in a club in London, and the guests arrived and they were given little petit fours that were attached to helium balloons. When they ate the petit fours, helium balloons went up to the ceiling. Much later on, they had to play a game of consequences, and they had to read out the stories they'd written using the helium from the balloons, which had been on the ceiling all the time and everyone had forgotten about them. And this, to me, was so pleasing that I use it as an example of how you use something in a story early on and people think you've used it all and dispensed with it. But then if you happen to be able to smuggle it back in again, it's really rewarding.
Yes, well, with both David Mitchell and Amitav Ghosh, in these books I'm coming across characters who are being used in that way. You meet them early on and they seem to have been discarded, and then they come back into the story.
And you often find you can't do it more than once.
No.
Yes, that would seem like too much. So that's another thing that writers develop a sense for, which is how often you can get away with a trick. You have to be very careful with tricks and not do them too much, or the reader will, unless you intend it as a deliberate effect in its own right. But these are some of the tricks that we pull.
You tricksy people, you.
Oh, we are. We love it. We love it. It's a bit like conjuring, and also there are quite a lot of non-fictional applications for storytelling. That sounded awful. Non-fictional applications. That's not the way a fiction writer should talk.
You've been lying to policemen, have you, lately?
But the storytelling is very powerful, and the principles of storytelling are useful in more ways than just writing fiction. Advertisers use it, and a good advert usually has a kind of story structure to it. Story
building to attention and then a resolution.
Yes, exactly, it uses things like contrast. You've been talking about contrast a lot. So these are sort of real fundamentals about the way people like things.
Yeah,
and that's another thing you're discovering when you read with this awareness, like a writer.
Yes, I'm still a baby in my forensic reading, but I'm sure I'll come across more tricks and more clevernesses over the years, but it is fascinating to try and see the skeleton behind it. That's another thing. I mean, I can see the crafting the skeleton in both these two books.
By skeleton, do you mean the overall structure?
Yes, the overall structure, because I mean, David Mitchell is split into these time segments, and so you can almost see how he'd have plotted it on a wall chart for these people coming together here and there and whatever. And same with the Amitav Ghosh. It's a highly complex story involving a big cast over a huge set of distances. And again, it has to be very carefully plotted to make sure it all fits and dovetails.
And are you noticing particular crescendos? Because often when we talk about the overall structure of a book, we think in terms of where the big twists are. So this would be the 3-act structure or the 4-act structure, if you want to call it 4 acts. But there tend to be specific points where it's good to have your major twists.
Yes. I couldn't identify that for you, but certainly with the Flood book.
Flood.
The book is called Flood of Fire.
Ah.
It's all about the Raj and the Opium Wars with China. But it's very difficult to put a book down to go to sleep until you've resolved a particular tension, a particular climax. So yes, there are waves within the book, you can see.
I like that phrase.
All building towards the end. And when you get to the crest of a wave, I mean, either you can stop there or you can crash down to the trough of the next one. and then stop and start again.
And very
But,
often
yeah.
they'll want to keep you reading. So
Yes.
you might think, I'll just get to the end of this chapter and then I'll be able to go to sleep. They actually don't want you to do that. So you must have been noticing that there are ways where they
Yes,
will keep
but
you
when you
up.
get a book that's 600-700 pages long, then most authors are going to have to accept, I think, that very few of their readers will be able to take the book in one hit.
Oh, yes,
So
of course.
it's got to be split into discrete sections.
And we all have to get off the tube and go to work, for instance.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Actually, speaking of the size of the books, I am in awe of the fact you manage to regularly get through quite a lot of books of that size. What did you say, 600 pages? I mean, from where
Yeah.
I'm sitting, they're 2 inches thick, these. They're like breeze blocks.
They are, yes.
Now,
they're massive.
Do you have any secrets for reading fast but still reading completely?
When I was very much younger, I could read very fast, and my brother couldn't. So we're talking, I don't know, 1,500 words a minute, something like that, whatever the figure might be. And he'd be around 300. And he went on a speed reading course in his university, and he improved his reading time to about the same as mine. But he increased his retention as well. So although I naturally read quickly, I don't necessarily read with full retention. I can if I concentrate, but I can also read much quicker. I mean, you can top and tail a book, a page, a chapter, whatever you want.
How do you do this?
You can, well, particularly with an academic text, the first paragraph of a chapter will lay out what the author intends to show or prove, and the final paragraph will be his conclusion.
That's different though from work of fiction.
That's different from work of fiction, but that's one way. So you can get very quickly through a text and see whether it's appropriate to you, then go back to it, skim it and scan it, and or read it properly. So lots of ways of reading. But I mean, I can read lines at a time rather than just a word at a time if I really concentrate on it by following a pattern on the page or taking my finger down the page. I can read whole lines rather than individual words.
Gosh. I mean, I just get too trapped by
Yeah.
a good phrase.
But
a good
then
sentence.
when that happens, when I get a really good phrase, I have to go back and read it again.
I get
But,
a paragraph can actually keep me busy for half an hour because
Yeah.
I just become mesmerised by it, and particularly if I'm sitting there trying to work out how the fall of words did that.
Reading at normal speed, I wouldn't expect to spend more than a minute on a page.
I don't know how long I spend, but I do know that I'm a slow reader, and that.
I'm probably the
takes me
better
a long
for
t-
it.
Well, maybe, but it means that I miss a lot because I just simply cannot fit it in.
Yeah. Whereas I fit more in, but I may not get the subtleties and the nuances out of the text that you would.
Maybe, yeah.
And it's very difficult. There are millions of books out there. I'm never going to read all of them. And it's a trade-off. Some of them I read very carefully. Some of them, if I read it quickly, I'll go back and read it again. Yours was one in point. Memories. Echo Boy, I've read twice. Because I know there's more in it I can take out of it. David Mitchell's Cloud Atlas, I've read twice. I'll go back and read that again.
I've read Cloud Atlas once, and I've read the Orison of Sunni.
Yeah.
Is that how I can't quite
Whatever
remember.
it is,
Yeah,
yes,
well, the Orison
yes,
of whatnot.
yes.
I've read that story
Yeah.
about 3 times because I just really like it.
Yes.
So yes, I then go and slow myself down even more by reading things again, having
Yeah,
enjoyed them.
It is difficult, isn't it?
But part of reading like a writer is, I suppose, you have to find what suits you and what you want to get out of it. And I would love to be able to read faster, but still be able to get what I get out of out of the books. There just aren't enough hours.
I think the faster you read, the less you can relish the words. It's rather like eating. If you've got a particularly delicious piece of food, you can gulp it down in 3 mouthfuls, or you could have little tiny nibbles and make it last for half an hour.
That's true, actually, yes.
You know, you can cram a bar of chocolate in one hit, or you can have little tiny bits.
I did actually manage to read Salman Rushdie's The Ground Beneath Her Feet in one day, but I wasn't reading it to really sit there and be in the experience, and I had to read it for another reason.
Yeah.
But I'm aware I haven't read it properly. But anyway, if anybody has tips for reading fast, I would love to hear them, so do please tell me. And speaking of which, I could do our sign-off and say who we are and where to find us, because we all seem to forget this.
You could do that.
Yes, I could.
And introduce the last piece of music.
I will do that once
Right.
I have told people who we are and where to find us. I mentioned Barton's Bookshop at the beginning. That's where Peter is. He's Peter Snell at Barton's Bookshop. Also, you can contact either of us at Surrey Hills Radio. I'm Ros Morris. I have various blogs and things. If you just Google Ros Morris or look for me on Facebook or Twitter, then you'll find me. And the final song. Well, when I announced the title of the previous one, You Do Something to Me, people might well have thought I meant another song called You Do Something to Me. So I thought we'd have that one.
Okay, let's compare and contrast.
Yes, indeed. And this version, it's not actually the same song at all. It's a completely different song. This is Paul Weller with You Do Something to Me.